At 30,000 feet, the sky looked calm from the outside. The clouds were smooth and bright, spread out like a quiet white ocean beneath the aircraft. Inside the cockpit, everything seemed normal too. The instruments glowed softly, the engines hummed with a steady rhythm, and the crew followed routine procedures they had done hundreds of times before. It was supposed to be just another flight. Then the first warning sound broke the silence. It was short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. One of the engine indicators flickered. For a second, it looked like a minor glitch, something pilots see and correct without much thought. But before anyone could speak, the second engine warning appeared. The sound changed, louder, more urgent, the kind of sound that makes a trained mind switch instantly from routine to survival. Within seconds, both engines began to lose power. At 30,000 feet, that is not just a problem. It is a nightmare. The aircraft was now gliding instead of flying. No thrust, no pushing force, just gravity slowly pulling it down. The cockpit filled with fast breathing and controlled movements. The crew followed emergency steps, their hands moving quickly but carefully. They tried restarts. They checked fuel flow. They reset systems. Nothing worked. Outside the cockpit, passengers felt something was wrong before anyone explained it. The hum they were used to faded. The plane felt lighter, quieter, almost unnatural. Some looked out of the windows. Others held armrests tighter without knowing why. Fear does not always arrive with panic. Sometimes it arrives with silence. The crew made the announcement. Calm voice, careful words. No drama. Just enough information to prepare people without causing chaos. Still, hearts began to race. At that height, there are no easy options. The aircraft was losing altitude slowly, but steadily. Far below, air traffic controllers were already reacting. Screens filled with data. Voices overlapped on the radio. Emergency paths were calculated. Nearest airfields were checked. But distance mattered. Time mattered more. And time was slipping. As the crew worked through every possible solution, one more attempt was made. Another restart. Another system check. Again, nothing. The engines stayed silent. That was when a strange sound came through the radio. First, it was faint, almost lost in static. Not the voice of air traffic control. Not one of the usual emergency channels. The sound was different, higher, younger. The crew looked at each other, confused. The voice came again, clearer this time. It was a child's voice, not panicked, not crying, just focused, almost careful. The voice said a single word. Falcon. The cockpit went quiet. No one spoke. No one moved for a second. The word meant nothing to the passengers, and at first, it made little sense to the crew either. Then training kicked in. Recognition followed. Falcon was not a random word. It was a call sign, and not just any call sign. The crew quickly switched frequencies, trying to locate the source. The child's voice returned, repeating the call sign with more confidence now. There was background noise behind it. Steady, controlled, professional. This was not a prank. This was not an accident. Somewhere nearby, high above or fast across the sky, military aircraft were operating. F-22s. The realization changed everything. F-22 pilots do not casually enter civilian airspace conversations. They are disciplined, precise, and protected by layers of protocol. If a child's voice was being heard, it meant something unusual was happening on their end too. The crew responded carefully. They acknowledged the call, keeping their message short and clear. Within moments, a deeper, calm adult voice joined the channel. The child did not speak again, but the presence remained. The F-22 pilot confirmed visual contact. He had the aircraft in sight. For the first time since the engines failed, something changed inside the cockpit. Not relief, not yet, but hope. Controlled, cautious hope. The kind professionals allow themselves only when there is a real reason. The military pilot did not take control. He did not give orders. He did something more important. He became eyes in the sky. He confirmed altitude, descent rate, and surrounding conditions. He relayed information faster than ground systems could. Below them, options narrowed. Above them, time continued to move forward. Inside the passenger cabin, no one knew any of this. They held hands. They whispered prayers. Some stared straight ahead. Some closed their eyes. They trusted the people they could not see. And in the cockpit, with engines still silent and the ground slowly rising, the crew listened closely as the voice from the F-22 guided them through the next moments. Somewhere in the chain of events, a child had spoken one word at exactly the right time. And nothing would be the same after that. The aircraft kept descending, smooth but unstoppable. Without engine power, every decision mattered more than usual. The crew adjusted their posture, their breathing, their focus. There was no room for fear in their hands, only precision. Each instrument was checked again, not because it would suddenly change, but because discipline demanded it. The voice from the F-22 stayed calm. Short updates came through the radio. Distance, angle, wind conditions. The military jet stayed slightly behind and to the side, careful not to disturb the aircraft's fragile glide. The pilot knew this was not a moment for speed or display. This was about stability. Inside the cockpit, calculations ran silently. How far could they glide? How much altitude could they trade for distance? Every 1,000 feet lost meant fewer options. The nearest runway was still far. The ocean lay in another direction. Turning too sharply could steal lift. Turning too late could cost everything. The crew shared looks instead of words. Each look carried years of training, long nights, and decisions made under pressure. They trusted each other without needing reassurance. In the cabin, tension thickened. The quiet felt wrong. Planes are never supposed to be this quiet. A few passengers noticed the steady angle downward. Others noticed the faces of the flight attendants, calm but serious. A child asked a question that was gently answered with a smile that did not quite reach the eyes. A few rose back. Someone whispered a prayer. Another person squeezed their phone tightly, not even checking the screen. Fear was present, but panic had not taken over. People sensed that something important was happening, even if they did not know what. Back in the sky, the F-22 pilot reported something critical. Weather ahead was clear. Winds were stable. Visibility was good. These were small details, but in moments like this, small details mattered more than big promises. The crew made a careful adjustment. The aircraft responded slowly, like a heavy body moving through thick air. It held. No alarm sounded. No sudden drops followed. That was a small victory. The engines were still dead. Another restart attempt was discussed, then dismissed. Enough time had already been lost. Focus had to stay on landing, not miracles. The aircraft was now committed to a single path. Ground control updated their calculations. Emergency crews were moving. Runway lights were prepared. Everything that could be done on the ground was being done. But no one said the word safe. No one promised anything. The F-22 stayed with them. At one point, the military pilot mentioned the child again, briefly. The child had been seated behind him during a training flight, listening through a shared channel. The call sign had slipped out naturally, without understanding its weight. The pilot did not sound angry. He sounded thoughtful. The crew acknowledged the message quietly. No one commented further. There was no time to reflect on how strange it all was. Altitude dropped below a critical mark. The aircraft was now close enough that the ground no longer felt abstract. The shape of the land became clearer. Lines, roads, and water reflected sunlight. This was the point where mistakes became visible. The crew prepared for a landing without power. They reviewed posture, speed, and angle again. Every movement was slow and intentional. Rushing would only steal control. In the cabin, the announcement came again. Short, honest, reassuring without promises. Passengers were instructed to prepare. Seats were checked. Belts tightened. Loose items secured. The sound of movement replaced the silence. Some passengers cried quietly. Others stared straight ahead. A few reached out and held hands with strangers. No one shouted. No one screamed. The situation had moved past that stage. The aircraft crossed another invisible threshold. Below this point, There would be no second chances. The runway was now visible in the distance, still small, still far, but real. The F-22 pilot confirmed alignment. Slight correction advised. The crew followed it smoothly. The aircraft responded, obedient but fragile. Seconds felt longer now. Every breath felt counted. The engines remained silent to the end. But the wings still worked. Lift still existed. And skill still mattered. As the runway grew larger, the crew prepared for the final moments. They knew that survival now depended not on power, but on judgment, calm, and timing. Behind them, in another aircraft, a military pilot watched closely, ready to speak if needed, knowing that sometimes the most important help is simply being there. And far above where this had all begun, the sky remained calm and blue, as if unaware of how close everything had come to ending. The ground was no longer something imagined. It was close enough to feel real, close enough to judge distance by instinct rather than instruments alone. The aircraft moved through the air like a heavy bird with tired wings, steady but vulnerable. Every small vibration carried meaning now. The crew had shifted into a different mental space. This was no longer about solving a problem. It was about managing the outcome. The plan was simple, but simplicity did not mean ease. Speed had to be exact. Angle had to be precise. Too fast would mean overshooting. Too slow would mean dropping short. There was no room for correction. Inside the cockpit, words were few. Each person knew their role. Hands rested lightly on controls, not forcing anything. Eyes moved between the runway, the horizon, and the instruments in a quiet rhythm. The training that once felt endless now guided every breath. In the cabin, time felt distorted. Some passengers felt the descent in their ears. Others felt it in their stomachs. A few looked out the windows and saw the runway for the first time. It did not look large. It did not look welcoming. It looked narrow and final. A flight attendant moved carefully down the aisle, making eye contact with people instead of speaking. That eye contact mattered. It reminded everyone that they were not alone. The aircraft passed another altitude marker. The crew adjusted again, barely noticeable to anyone else. The wings held firm. The air remained smooth. Luck had not turned against them, but no one trusted luck. The voice from the F-22 returned briefly. Calm confirmation. Position steady. No obstacles. The military pilot did not offer encouragement. He offered information. That was what mattered. Below them, emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights visible even in daylight. The sight of them brought mixed feelings. Preparedness was comforting. Their presence was also a reminder of risk. The aircraft crossed the outer boundary of the airport airspace. The runway was now directly ahead. Everything narrowed to a single line. The crew prepared for the final descent. Without engine noise, the cockpit felt almost unreal. The sound of air moving over the wings was clear now, a steady rush like wind against an open window. The landing gear was deployed. The sound echoed through the aircraft. Solid, mechanical, real. In the cabin, people heard it and felt it through the floor. Some took it as a sign of progress. Others took it as a sign of how close they were to the end of whatever this was going to be. The aircraft continued downward. Every second was heavy. At this point, there was no option to go around. No chance to climb. The path was locked in. The crew accepted it fully, not with fear, but with focus. As the runway markings became clearer, the pilot adjusted the angle slightly. Just enough. The aircraft responded smoothly. The wings stayed level. The descent rate held. The crew monitored speed closely. It was right on the edge of what was acceptable. Any slower and lift would fade. Any faster and stopping would become dangerous. Inside the cabin, silence returned. Not the tense silence from before, but something deeper. People had stopped whispering. Many had closed their eyes. A few stared forward, unmoving. Someone near the window noticed the ground rushing past faster now. The sense of motion returned, strong and undeniable. The aircraft crossed the runway threshold. This was the moment. The crew eased the controls gently, guiding the aircraft down, letting it settle rather than forcing it. The wheels were inches from the ground. Then contact. The first wheels touched the runway with a heavy but controlled impact. The sound was loud, solid, real. The aircraft shuddered but held together. The remaining wheels followed moments later. Applause did not erupt. Cheers did not break out. What filled the cabin instead was something quieter. Relief mixed with disbelief. Some people laughed softly. Some cried without sound. Some simply breathed for the first time in what felt like hours. The aircraft rolled forward, slowing without engine thrust. Brakes worked hard. The runway stretched ahead. Every meter gained felt like a gift. The crew kept full control, guiding the aircraft straight, steady, and true. The plane slowed further. The worst was over, but discipline remained. Finally, the aircraft came to a complete stop. For a moment, no one spoke. In the cockpit, the crew sat still, hands resting where they had been seconds before. They did not celebrate. They did not relax. They simply acknowledged the reality. They were on the ground, safe. Behind them, in the sky, the F-22 peeled away smoothly, its mission complete. And far above, a single word spoken earlier echoed quietly in memory. Falcon. The moment the aircraft stopped, reality returned in waves. It did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like sound after a long silence. The hum of systems still running. The faint crackle of radios. The distant movement of vehicles outside. Inside the cabin, people stayed seated longer than expected. Seatbelts remained fastened. No one rushed to stand. It was as if everyone needed proof that the ground beneath them was truly solid. A quiet voice came over the speaker, calm, measured, thanking everyone for staying seated, explaining that help was already outside. The words were ordinary, but the meaning behind them was heavy. The danger had passed. Some passengers pressed their foreheads against the seat in front of them. Others leaned back and closed their eyes. A few wiped their faces, surprised to find tears there. It was not fear anymore. It was release. Emergency crews approached carefully. Doors were checked. Signals exchanged. Procedures followed exactly as they should be. There was no rush. When something nearly goes wrong at that height, patience becomes part of safety. In the cockpit, the crew finally allowed themselves to look at each other. Not to speak, just to look. Each face carried the same mix of exhaustion and relief. Hands that had been steady for so long now felt the weight of what they had held back. One of them glanced at the instruments again, almost out of habit. The engines were still silent. That fact no longer felt threatening, felt finished. Outside, the world continued as usual. Vehicles moved. Radios buzzed. People on the ground went about their roles with calm professionalism. From a distance, it might have looked like a routine landing. Only those inside knew how close it had come. Passengers were eventually guided off the aircraft in small groups. Feet touched the runway. Knees felt weak. Some looked back at the plane as if it were something alive. Others avoided looking at it at all. A few passengers stopped to thank the crew. Simple words. Quiet voices. No speeches. Gratitude did not need decoration. Not far away, in restricted airspace, the F-22 had already returned to its base. No announcement followed. No report went public right away. The mission did not exist for anyone who did not need to know. Somewhere in that process, the mention of the child came up again. Not as a headline, not as a miracle story, just as a detail. A small, human detail in a chain of serious decisions. The crew reflected on it privately. How a single word, spoken without intent, had cut through noise at the exact right moment. How awareness sometimes comes from unexpected places. Investigations began quietly. Data was reviewed. Systems were checked. No blame was placed prematurely. This was not about fault. It was about understanding. Experts examined engine logs. Fuel systems were tested. Environmental conditions were analyzed. Every piece of information mattered, not for the past, but for the future. For the passengers, life resumed in pieces. Some called family members immediately. Others waited until later, not ready to explain. A few found themselves unable to sleep that night, replaying the silence, the descent, the feeling of waiting. For the crew, paperwork followed. Reports were written, questions answered, procedures reviewed. They moved through it with professionalism, but the weight stayed with them. In moments alone, small details returned. The quiet, the glide, the sound of the landing gear, the sight of the runway growing closer. These were not memories to share easily. Days later, the event reached the public in a limited way. Technical issue, a safe landing. No dramatic language. No mention of how close it truly was. That was intentional. Not every story needs to be told loudly. The word Falcon never appeared in any official release. It did not need to. Those who heard it understood its place in the sequence. Those who did not need to. Time moved forward as it always does. Flights continued. Skies remained busy. Most people never knew how fragile the margin can be at 30,000 feet. But for a small group of people, the meaning of silence, training, and timing had changed forever. And for one child, who had spoken a word without knowing its weight, the sky would always hold a quiet connection that no one else could fully explain. In the weeks that followed, the event did not fade the way most intense moments do. It settled instead, quietly, into the lives of everyone involved. Not as fear, but as awareness. The kind that changes how a person notices small things. For the passengers, normal routines felt slightly different. The sound of an aircraft engine during future flights drew more attention than before. Turbulence felt heavier. Silence inside a cabin felt louder. Many did not speak about the experience openly, but it shaped how they thought about trust, chance, and preparation. Some found themselves checking safety cards again, even on short flights. Others found comfort in routine announcements they once ignored. The experience did not create panic. It created respect for systems and the people who operate them. For the crew, returning to the cockpit was both familiar and unfamiliar. The controls felt the same. The procedures were unchanged. But something inside had shifted. Every checklist carried more meaning now. Every quiet moment held memory. They did not speak about the incident often among themselves. When they did, it was brief and technical. There was no need to dramatize it. The reality was already understood. Training sessions took on new weight. Scenarios once treated as rare became personal. Discussions became sharper. Attention became deeper. Experience had turned theory into memory. Behind closed doors, the investigation continued. Engineers worked methodically. Patterns were studied. A chain of small failures was identified, none dramatic on their own but dangerous together. Adjustments were recommended. Safeguards were strengthened. The system responded as it should. No single person was credited. No single mistake was blamed. Aviation does not work that way. It is built on layers, and survival often depends on how those layers hold when pressure builds. Somewhere else, in a very different environment, a child returned to everyday life. School. Routine. Simple conversations. The words spoken that day carried no special meaning to anyone around them. But adults noticed something subtle. A new seriousness when watching planes in the sky. Pause before speaking. A curiosity about how things work. The child did not know why these feelings existed. They just did. The military pilot who had heard the call sign thought about it once in a while. Not with pride, with reflection. He understood how easily that voice could have gone unheard. How timing is not something that can be controlled. He did not tell the story widely. It was not his to tell. Life continued. News cycles moved on. Other stories took their place. The world did not stop for a quiet landing that avoided disaster. But impact does not require attention to be real. For one passenger, the experience led to a career change. For another, it changed how they spent time with family. For someone else, it became a private reminder to slow down and notice moments that once felt ordinary. For the crew, professionalism remained the surface. Beneath it lived something deeper, a reminder of why training matters, why calm matters, why discipline saves lives. Occasionally, when flying at high altitude on clear days, One of them would glance out and notice the quiet beauty of the sky. Not with fear, with respect. They understood now how thin the margin can be between routine and emergency. How silence can be both dangerous and peaceful. How trust between strangers can exist without words. The event never became a legend. It never turned into a dramatic headline. And that was perhaps its greatest success. It ended the way all good aviation stories should. Without tragedy. Without spectacle. With people walking away carrying lessons they would never forget. And high above, where engines normally roar and the world feels distant, the sky remained the same. White, calm, indifferent. But for those who had passed through it without power, guided only by skill, timing, and a single unexpected voice, it would always feel different. Not frightening, just honest. Time continued to move forward, but the memory did not stay in the past. It surfaced in unexpected moments, quietly and without warning. Not as fear, but as understanding. The kind that only comes after something almost breaks and then holds. For the crew, the experience reshaped how they thought about responsibility. Every flight carries weight, but this one had made that weight visible. Not heavy enough to crush them, but solid enough to remind them why attention matters even when nothing seems wrong. They noticed how easily routine can dull awareness, how repetition can hide risk. The incident had stripped away that comfort. In its place was clarity. Conversations with colleagues changed slightly. There was less assumption, more listening. Small concerns were taken seriously. Silence during operations was respected more deeply. When asked about the landing later, they described it plainly. Engines failed. Procedures followed. Aircraft landed. The truth did not need decoration. The emotion lived between the words, not inside them. For the passengers, memory softened with time but never vanished. The body remembered before the mind did. A sudden quiet on a later flight could bring a tight breath. A steady descent could bring a moment of tension. Most did not speak about it openly. Felt personal. The kind of experience that does not belong to a group anymore once it is over. It becomes private. Some found gratitude in unexpected places. For strangers. For systems. For skills they had never seen but had trusted completely. Gratitude does not always arrive as joy. Sometimes it arrives as calm. The child grew older, unaware of how often that single word was remembered elsewhere. No one told the story in a way that placed meaning on it. That was intentional. The child was allowed to remain just a child. Yet something subtle remained. A fascination with flight, with sound, with the way communication matters. The curiosity did not feel heroic. Felt natural. The military pilot, long past the moment, carried it as a quiet reminder that even in environments built on precision and control, unpredictability exists. That awareness is not always loud. In professional settings, the incident was referenced indirectly. Training materials were updated. Communication protocols refined. Nothing dramatic, just improvement. That is how safety grows. Not through fear, but through attention. The sky continued to carry aircraft across distances without pause. Most flights were uneventful. Most landings forgettable. That is how it should be. But every once in a while, someone involved would look up and feel a strange sense of connection to that space. Not ownership. Not pride. Recognition. They understood now that flight is not about conquering the sky. It is about cooperating with it. The engines that failed were repaired. Systems redesigned. Aircraft returned to service. The machine moved on. People do not move on the same way machines do. They carry moments forward, reshaped into understanding, into patience, into respect. The incident never defined anyone. It did not become identity. It became context, and context changes everything. In quiet moments, long after paperwork and reports were finished, one thought returned again and again, that survival often comes not from power, but from preparation. Not from control, but from cooperation. Not from noise, but from clarity. And sometimes from listening carefully enough to hear a small voice at exactly the right time. Years passed, and the moment settled into history the way real events do. Not as a story told often, but as a memory carried quietly. Life continued for everyone involved, shaped only slightly, but meaningfully, by what had happened high above the ground. The aircraft returned to service after careful review and repair. It flew again just like thousands of others. Passengers who boarded it later never knew what it had once endured. To them, it was just another machine carrying them from one place to another. That was how it should be. For the crew, the experience remained personal. Not something shared at gatherings or used as a reminder of skill. It was held inwardly, a private reference point. A moment that defined the importance of calm more than courage, and discipline more than drama. When asked what saved the flight, they never pointed to one thing. They spoke about teamwork, about systems that worked as designed, about training that prepared them to act without hesitation. The truth was larger than a single cause. The passengers returned to their lives with stories they rarely told in full. Many simply said they had been on a flight that had a problem and landed safely. They left out the silence, the waiting, the feeling of gravity slowly taking over. Those details belonged to them alone. Some carried forward a new habit of gratitude. For everyday arrivals, for routine landings, for moments once taken for granted. Gratitude did not fade, even as fear did. The child grew older, unaware of how one ordinary moment had traveled far beyond its origin. The words spoken that day blended into memory like any other sound. No one built a story around it. No one asked the child to carry meaning that did not belong to them. And that was perhaps the most human part of all. The military pilot continued flying. So did many others. The skies remained full of motion, patterns, and quiet cooperation. Most flights ended without notice. Most stories never existed. But somewhere in the background of routine operations, a lesson lived on. That listening matters. That awareness does not always come from expected places. That human presence, even quiet, can change outcomes. The event never became a legend. It was never used to inspire fear or wonder. It became something more practical and more honest. It became a reminder that systems are built by people, maintained by people, and saved by people working together under pressure. That survival is rarely about a single heroic act. It is about many small decisions made correctly, one after another. And sometimes, it is about being open enough to hear something unexpected and take it seriously. At 30,000 feet, where the margin between routine and disaster is thin, that openness made the difference. The sky did not change that day. It remained wide and indifferent. But for a handful of people, it gained depth. It became a place not just of travel, but of responsibility. And when engines hum today, steady and reassuring, those who remember know that behind the sound is effort, training, and trust working silently together. That is how the story ends. Not with celebration, not with spectacle, but with people walking away, lives continuing, and a lesson carried quietly forward. Just as it should be.